I don't know if I've ever heard you talk on this or not, but there's a lot of research that connects suicidality with atheism or the nihilism that comes in lieu of atheism. And so I would say that's another example of a bad fruit, basically. Now, I know I'm speaking from my moral, like real moral perspective, but if I look at something like Pol Pot, Stalin, Mao Zedong, all these horrific millions and millions and millions of deaths kind of done within atheist regimes. Like, there is no God. The state is now in that top place of determining outcomes, and then the result of that is, I would say, horrific, not just emotionally horrific, but really horrific. But I hear the response that I've normally heard, and I don't know if I've heard you say this or not, but is none of those things were done in the name of atheism.
Yeah.
And I always think to myself, in the name of, well, if the perspective is in your mind and it generates the action, you don't have to say, I do it for atheism, rah! Like, it is a tree generating that fruit. So I don't even know what the idea of doing something in the name of means, but I wanted to ask you this question.
Yeah, there's loads to unpack there. The first thing is that this broad principle that by their fruits you shall know them, talking about the truth of an ideology, I don't think that there is a necessary connection between the fruits of a worldview and the truth of its fundamental tenets. It may be that Christianity is the most stabilizing system of governance and thought for a society that does not entail the view that Jesus of Nazareth rose from the dead. You know what I mean? So it depends exactly what you're asking. If you mean to imply that the fruits of Christianity should be some indication of its potential truth, I would dispute that. If you're just asking about the fruits of Christianity and whether it's been good for the world as opposed to atheism, that's a slightly different question. It is true that atheist regimes, like the ones you've mentioned, don't kill in the name of atheism, but you might want to say something like, but their atheism at least allowed for it. The problem is that this sword sort of goes both ways, in that if you take a secular regime, not secular, forgive me for saying secular, that's my least favorite thing that people do, is when they describe the Soviet Union as secular. Secular means having no hand in religious affairs. I think that purposefully exterminating people on the basis of their religious belief is not secular. Atheist, yes. Secular, no. But if you take one of these atheist regimes and take some kind of conflict or some kind of oppressive government, suppose you were to then add in religious sentiment, add in the sentiment from both the leader of the regime and also the people who are living under it, that they were acting in accordance with the will of God. Would that make things better or worse? Now, I think the Christian answer to that is to say, well, if they actually acted in accordance with Christianity, then it would make things better. But if the question is about, like, in practice, whether religious belief makes things better or worse, look at Adolf Hitler as an example of probably an atheist, and if so, someone who masqueraded as a Christian. In Mein Kampf, Adolf Hitler says, I quote, "In standing guard against the Jew, I'm doing the handiwork of the Lord." Famously, he had on the belt buckles of every Nazi soldier, "Gott mit uns," God with us. Atheists weren't allowed into the SS. Did you know that? They weren't allowed because they didn't trust them, And so there's this question of, like, so either it's the case that Adolf Hitler was a Christian and meant when he said that he was inspired by Christianity and his religious belief to do what he did, in which case that's the problem working in the other direction. But what people want to say is, of course, he wasn't actually a Christian. He was just pretending to be a Christian. If that's the case, then why did Adolf Hitler think that pretending to be a Christian would make it easier to institute his fascist campaign? Because of the fact that religious belief can justify all kinds of evils, right? And so I think it kind of goes in both directions. Atheism has no content. It can't inspire anything. It can at best allow for something to take place.
Well, two things. One, I'm sure you've heard Dr. Frank Turek use the analogy that if someone plays Beethoven really bad, you don't blame Beethoven, you blame the terrible pianist. I would definitely say Hitler is just butchering it, just absolutely butchering it, right? So that's the first thing I would say about that.
Understatement of the year, I think.
Right, yeah. So then the second thing is, I I think I track with what you're saying about the difference of like explicitly like giving a law from on high that creates, you know, the Holodomor or whatever terrible thing happened in you know, Stalin's Russia or whatever. There's a difference between a prescription and just an allowance for based on the belief system. So I totally track with that. I'm just saying that from my reading, it appears that there were more deaths in the 20th century under these atheistic regimes than every other century on record combined. Mm-hmm. And so all that I'm saying is that I think that's like, regardless of where you're coming to the conversation from, that's a big deal to look at, is all I'm trying to say.
Do you think that huge number of casualties in the 20th century, as compared to the rest of human warfare, had more to do with ideological considerations or technology?
Well, that's a great point too. Yeah, I think that you could make an argument that the impact would be less if not for technology. I think that's a fair point.
That, like, if you're asking if it's like why the number of casualties so high, it's like, I think that the invention of the Tommy gun and the tank might have had something more to do with that than the lack of belief in God from some but not all of like, you know, the Nazi party, because of course many of the people who were actually doing the handiwork of these dictators themselves believed in God. But by the way, I do think that if you are actually, let's say this, if you genuinely believe that, if you genuinely try to act in accordance with the will and advice of Jesus of Nazareth, I don't think you get Nazism, right? Just to be clear. And I think that you probably get a pretty good society, depending on exactly what you mean, because of course Jesus seemed to be an apocalyptic prophet who said, take no thought for the morrow. I'm not sure how that works on a governmental level, but broadly speaking, when it comes to the ethical principles, like, yeah, if you act in accordance with the will of Jesus, man, you're going to probably be in a better spot than a lot of other ideologies that are on offer, let's say. I'm happy to simply grant that, but just to reiterate, I don't think that bears on the truth value of Christianity, and also it's difficult to point a finger at a non-concept. It's difficult to point the finger at atheism because it doesn't have any content.
Okay, the reason I'm going to push back on this a little bit is because it makes a lot of sense. If you tell people that they don't have a soul, that emotions are just chemicals, that love is an illusion, that there is no higher moral ethic that has been given to us from above that we have to abide by, it makes sense logically that you're going to be more likely to step into nihilism.
Okay, but do you think that the Soviet Union was nihilistic?
I think that atheism is dehumanizing.
Sure.
And
okay.
once you dehumanize, like from my perspective, I think that we're actually that eternity is in our hearts, that love is real, that we exist because we're wanted. Like I have a very like I often use the analogy of Harry Potter, where it's like there's kind of a Dursley-ish view that's like there's no such thing as magic, and then there's a view that's like you're a wizard. Like there's actually like a lot more going on here. Like the universe is truly enchanted, right? And I know I'm not talking about literal magic; it's just a metaphor. But like the reason I get passionate about this topic is I am pro-humanity. I want people to prosper and thrive and live out of all of the faculties that we actually have and call those faculties by their proper name. Now, I know I don't mean to get preachy, but this is, I just want you to feel where I'm coming from. Like my motive, this is my motive. My motive is that I believe that people don't do as well either individually or as a society if they're told you're just an animal, you're just a higher evolved ape, all you have is that opposable thumb. It doesn't produce good fruit. Like I said, there's a lot of studies that have shown connection between atheism to nihilism and suicidality. And then let's be clear, like I don't think it's apathy, but like Joseph Stalin, like the Great Purge, you know, the Holodomor, these different things were again, not like dictated by atheism as if atheism is like a thing. So I totally agree with you there. But there was a specific effort to clear religion out of the society. Like they understood we have to get rid of religion. Religion is bad. And all that I'm saying is like what I would say is dehumanize people. It makes sense. Like it makes sense that people act bad when you tell them that they're just a robot or that they're just an animal. And it follows logically from where I sit.
Yeah. So the idea of, I understand why people would say that Christianity humanizes in at least an equitable sense, because I think it would be wrong to say that the Soviet Union, for example, was nihilistic, because its original foundation is essentially an ethical one, and it might be a misplaced ethical one, but it's certainly not one of moral nihilism. It's the idea of transferring power from the elite bourgeois class into the hands of the proletariat, right? It's not like you've got a bunch of people who decide there's no God, everything is permitted, let's just eat and drink and be merry. It's like, no, we have a moral principle about where power should lie. Now that moral principle might be misplaced, but it's not nihilistic. They believed in it. And so I understand what you mean when you say that Christianity might safeguard the idea that all humans are of equal value or something like that. But the idea that it safeguards good societies because otherwise you end up with people believing that, like, that there's no morality, there's nothing to act in accordance with. I think every single political revolution that history has ever seen has been based on some kind of moral principle. It's been some kind of truth value claim about value, right? It's been a truth value. It's been it's values having truth value, which is not a nihilistic position. And I don't think, like, if you're right that atheism necessarily leads, if you're correct that atheism necessarily leads to people throwing off morality, objective morality, then given that every revolution that has ended in disaster has been based on some kind of objective claim about values and morality, atheism, in your view, cannot lead to these kinds of revolutions.